This happens because people care about our nation, and AFA is pleased to lead the charge to ensure that we have a dominant Air Force well into the future. So please join us. And I will tell you too that we're proud to publish 2 outstanding publications. Air Force Magazine is well known worldwide, and you should be aware of our daily report, which by any measure is the definitive source of current information on the Air Force. So we encourage you to pursue both of those, and we'd love to have you as a member. Now, I'll tell you too that these things happen because we have a wonderful collaboration between our international representatives here, our allied nations, and would you join me in welcoming them with a round of applause? And of course, our members of industry are what makes this happen. And as you probably know, the Air Force Association hosts 2 major events. And our next significant one will be our new Air Force Association Air, Space, and Cyber Conference. And we hope that you will join us in September at the Gaylord as we host that. Now, we're honored to have with us this morning the Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force for Space and Principal DoD Space Advisor. He's responsible for integrating and overseeing all DoD space capabilities and activities, coordinating with the intelligence community, and providing support to the Secretary of Defense on space and on all space portfolio decisions. As Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force for Space, he provides the principal support to the Undersecretary's role as Headquarters U.S. Air Force focal point for space matters and in coordinating activities across the Air Force space enterprise. Now, I will tell you, Mr. Beauchamp, I read his biography, and he struck me as brilliant from the get-go because he has a degree in industrial engineering. As we all know, those are the best engineers of all. Now, I will tell you on the downside, he's got a son who is learning to repair avionics on C-130s, and we think that's a wonderful thing to do. I'm sad to report that that's in the United States Marine Corps. It's one team in one fight. And Mr. Beauchamp asked that we allow him to meander during his presentation, so he won't be here at the podium. But as his comments conclude, I will be pleased to moderate questions as long as you have them and as long as time permits. Mr. Beauchamp, thank you for being here, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to AFA for sponsoring these events. These breakfasts are a great informal way for government industry and our national partners to get together and have a variety of discussions on a bunch of different topics in a way that is a little more open, a little more collaborative than simply being on transmit at all times. But it's doing a number of events like this, working with our industry partners, with the associations, and with public groups as well of citizens. It makes me realize one critical factor after having done a number of these for the past couple of months, and that is I've got to write a new speech. A lot of the folks in this room, I think between Jim Armour and Jeff Trauberman, you guys are vying neck and neck for the folks who have been to every single one of these over the past couple of months. And so I'm going to talk about a little different stories today than I do normally, because I think this crowd deserves it. I think this is a good crowd for us. Telling something a little bit different, and I do mean it when I say public. One of the things you're going to hear today are some of the message that I give to folks not among the initiated. So folks who don't necessarily work space every day or even work DoD issues. There is a resurgence in interest in space in this country that I have not seen since the days of the moon landings. The level of interest in space at the middle school level is incredible to watch. And if you haven't been to a STEM event, if you haven't been to a science fair, if you haven't been to any of a number of activities, challenges that colleges and high schools are sponsoring, I encourage you to do so, if only to see the innovation and the excitement coming from our young people in this country. It makes me very optimistic about the future. But as a population as a whole, not everybody realizes the degree to which modern life in first world, second world societies depends upon the capabilities delivered by space. We all know that we all have devices in our pockets that give us access to all of the accumulated knowledge of the human race, and we mostly use it to complain about movies and look at pictures of cats. But in addition to that, we use it to navigate, to search, to communicate. And so, in addition to being able to find the closest 4-star rated Chinese restaurant nearby, what many people don't realize is that GPS, that global utility provided by the United States Air Force, is also used to set the timing signal for every financial transaction that's done electronically on Wall Street and across the globe. They're actually in the process now of changing the accuracy of that timing signal, the part that they use. They're going from a millisecond standard to a microsecond standard to ensure that as transactions are being made across the country and across the world, that there's no funny business going on in between the buy order and the sell, right? There was a movie about that, about making money that way. But the timing signal that they're using to keep those transactions in sync is the GPS signal. Every ship, every plane that flies, every vehicle that navigates on the ground and that doesn't already know where it's going, uses GPS as the primary mechanism to get its signal and to get updates on a concurrent basis about everything from traffic to road closures. And it's a global utility that we all depend on, and if it went away for whatever reason, major parts of the economy would grind to a halt, not just in the US, but globally. Modern society benefits from space in other ways as well. In addition to the classic example of near instant global communications, there's really only two ways that we communicate from the United States overseas and vice versa, right? You either do it through transatlantic cables, trans-Pacific cables under the surface of the water, or you do it via satellite links. Now, cables are in well-understood, well-known places, and if folks wanted to tinker with them, it would not be particularly difficult to do so. Space remains the assured way to get access to communications globally. And that's both for economic purposes and for command and control of forces around the world. Earth monitoring systems provide us great benefit as well. In addition to the obvious benefits for military purposes, ISR systems, commercial and otherwise, allow us to monitor natural disaster recovery efforts. There's a great documentary about how you use remote sensing to monitor the progress of Ebola in Africa by watching where crops went unharvested as the disease spread from region to region and country to country. Climate change progress, the primary method for monitoring the melting of ice caps and rise of sea level, comes from space monitoring. We all know that we monitor weather from space and we watch on TV, but do you know that in addition to watching something in cloud cover, which is the primary thing that everyone sees when they watch it, when they watch the news, we also monitor surface vector winds and the weather precursors to formations of tornadoes and tsunamis. All of these taken together have a profound impact on quality of life for the developed world and indirectly on the quality of life of the developing world through the ability to use this information to target disaster relief recovery efforts, recovery from droughts and famines around the world, and allow greater transparency into economic and social developments, everything from weather-related disasters to man-made situations such as wars and genocide. And space has brought that transparency in a way that's fairly ubiquitous and in fact often unnoticed and rarely attributed to its proper place. We would expect that in many ways from society, because everyone's busy and they have things to do. But it's also true among our own family in many cases. I'll tell you a story where I was at FA in Orlando, as a matter of fact. And as I like to do, I meet with vendors, and I wander the exhibit halls, and I talk to folks about what they're doing. And I spend a good deal of time in these conversations. And folks at the booths are always very excited to tell me what they're doing, I often got the same pattern of reaction. Great enthusiasm to explain. They have a spiel, they have to give the spiel, right? Whoever comes up to the booth. And they'll tell their story, and then they ask who I am, and I tell them, and they say, oh, okay. Well, well, like this, they'll go back, actually go back. I'm not a space guy, so good luck with that. And these are platform manufacturers, major systems integrators, weapons, munitions guys, electronics, avionics, all the typical vendors that go to these types of events. And at first I would say, okay, all right, sorry, to waste your time, and I would go somewhere else. But what I started doing in Orlando was going a little bit further and digging a little bit deeper. And I would say, no, it's okay. Tell me what you do, and I want to see if I could maybe connect it in some way. And so you could, spend some time with the guys who do terrestrial communications, and say, well, we're not really space. This is just the terrestrial comms, line of sight, regional communication systems. I said, oh, okay. For the region, how does one region talk to the other region? Pull the thread. Well, as it turns out, they use a SATCOM link to get there. Could be WGS, could be MUOS, could be commercial SATCOM link, KA, KU, right? Whatever we got. Oh, there you go. So you are a space guy, right? You do leverage the capabilities of space. Munitions guys. Look at this. I've got a new carbon fiber, casing where I can put submunition. I can put these, and I'm like, okay, great. That's terrific. Launch it off a UAV. Launch it off a fighter. Smaller footprint, same explosive power. Great. Where do you get your coordinates? Okay. Precision coordinates, minimizing collateral damage. Hit only the guys you want to hit, based on improved accuracy from GPS. No longer just using the minimum 3 satellites to get to within a certain CEP, but hey, it turns out if you can optimize that a little bit, you can tweak it a little bit, you can actually get even better. You can get down in these urban canyons, you can get down in valleys and improve accuracy even more. Oh, you are a space guy. You're leveraging these capabilities to make your system that much more effective. And on and on and on. Platforms, munitions, electronics, avionics, all of it's improved by capabilities bring in by space. It's like that ASBF commercial, right? We don't make the platform, we make it better, right? We have, in the United States Air Force, the finest pilots in the world. Their training, their motivation, their valor, their courage, second to none. Industry builds for us, and our governments require for us, the finest hardware, the best technology, by leaps and bounds, bar none in the world. And we make that technology available to our friends and allies, so they can protect their interests and their people as well. And I have every confidence that those pilots and that technology can stand up to anybody in a fair fight. Ladies and gentlemen, I have absolutely no interest in getting involved in a fair fight. And space allows you to avoid that fair fight. It delivers game-changing capabilities, information dominance over the horizon to allow you to project power, to get into theater, provide an effect with devastating accuracy, and get out safely. And that capability has enabled the United States to deliver the effect that we have seen over the past 25 years, since the first so-called space war in Desert Storm. Now that dominance is challenged because others have watched that progression. They've seen the capabilities that provides. They've taken steps to do two things. One, they see the devastating precision and they say, I want me some of that. And so they've developed precision-guided capabilities to mimic what we've done. And two, they've taken steps to find ways to deny us that capability. Through holding at risk the capabilities at space that enables it. My job, working with others in industry and at Space Command and elsewhere, is to find ways to negate those threats and to protect our space assets so we can maintain those capabilities. We are about that effort and have been for the past several years. We're working hard now to both leverage the investments that have been made for space protection over the past 2 years and focus them on specific programs that are the most effective ways to perform that mission. Secondly, as we recap and modernize our space mission capabilities, we will do so in a manner that emphasizes resilience instead of efficiency, as we have been in the past when space was a benign environment that didn't have a threat. And thirdly, we will work to develop the airmen necessary to operate in that sort of environment. We'll do the training, we'll develop the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and write the CONOPS for how we will respond in the face of a threat that could potentially arise to our operations in space. We have to know what we would do if we were threatened, and we'd have to know quickly, because these threats do not develop slowly. If someone decides to take action, we will not have time to make a phone call to decide what to do. And the current authorities are not delegated authorities to do something about such a threat. And so we've got to work all that out. And we're about that now. We're getting after that problem today. And so, working with our friends on the Hill, we are putting programs together to align all three of these lines of effort and work towards developing a more resilient, more secure enterprise. Certainly for the functions that we have to perform for the Department of Defense as the United States Air Force, but also to support that global utility that exists in space that underpins modern society. And to do that globally, we're supporting efforts in the State Department to develop global norms about what responsible behavior in space looks like. We already know what irresponsible behavior in space looks like. We've had examples of some of our friends from China and our friends in Russia who maybe didn't act as responsibly as they could when they were testing in ASAT systems. And we know what that effect is. From the 2007 test that the Chinese did, we're now, 8 years, almost 9 years later, we still maneuver every day to avoid debris created by that test. Because it was done in a fairly irresponsible way. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an obligation to provide not just space resiliency capabilities for the Department of Defense space, but for this global commons, for our commercial partners as well. Because in the same way that we would take action to defend a commercial ship that was threatened by an adversary on the high seas, or a commercial airliner that was threatened by a adversary missile or fighter plane that was threatening it, we must do the same in space. There's so much innovation and investment going on in space today that needs that level of protection in terms of policy, in terms of global norms of behavior, and acceptance of the way we will all agree to behave and treat each other. If I look at that renaissance of investment in space. In every dimension, I see commercial opportunities both for improved economic conditions as well as the ability for the government to leverage new technology. There's a huge resurgence in commercial remote sensing. Smaller satellites, larger numbers of them, in a number of companies like Skybox and BlackSky and Planet Labs. They're putting up flocks of hundreds, in some cases thousands of systems. Same thing for satellite communications. We're seeing both a renewal of technology in the geostationary systems that have been the bulwark of global communications for decades into new digital technologies. Technologies that include the ability to provide protection that, frankly, we'd like to see as well. Electromagnetic protection from interference, what we call jamming, as well as low Earth orbiting systems that are being built and fielded to provide a new level of connectivity globally. And thirdly, there's a great deal of investment going on in the launch arena from private companies that leverage a technological base that the government can leverage to deliver assured access to space, our strategy to ensure that we will always have the ability to launch national security payloads. So with all this, even in the face of the threat, I'm extremely optimistic about the future of national security space, resting upon a foundation of robust and strong commercial development of capabilities. I encourage you all to participate in the global conversation that's taking place about the importance of space and the need to defend the norms of behavior in space, and to participate in efforts to develop standards that will allow these new space capabilities to more easily be tracked so that they can be avoided from a collision conjunction perspective. Oh, I forgot to mention the fourth big emergence area of commercial renaissance is the development of commercial capabilities to do space tracking and surveillance. Companies have banded together to form consortia and to work with companies like AGI, who have the COMSPOC, the Commercial Space Operations Center, to contract for monitoring services. To say, if anybody gets too close to me or is about to, let me know so I can take action to maneuver to avoid a potential collision. As space continues to get more congested, this only makes perfect sense to augment the service that the JSPOC provides today of conjunction warnings. The market will decide what it needs in terms of protection for purposes of protecting an investment and providing insurance and the like. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States has enjoyed two great advantages in this century, the past century. The first is the innovation of our technology base and industry. An open market system that allows folks to benefit from the risks that they take provides tremendous benefits in the ability and the freedom and the openness and the willingness of folks to invest and take risk and profit from that risk, and has advanced the technology to a great degree in this area. And we're leveraging that in the government. Instead of the other way around, when we were driving the investment back 50 years ago. The second great advantage we have in this country is that we have the best friends in the world, many of whom are represented here in this room. And the system of alliances and friendships that we put together has enabled us to both share technology and work together to protect peace-loving peoples around the world and ensure free access and use of commons for all. And between those two advantages, I'm very optimistic about our ability to face the challenges of the future and to move forward in space together. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Westphal. And the ground rules are, raise your hand if you'd like to express a question, and we'll bring a microphone to you. And as it comes to you, we kindly ask that you identify who you are and the organization that you represent. So And Bridget's in the back with a microphone, and we have a question right in front of you, Bridget, right, that gentleman right there, his hand went up first.
Good morning, I'm Philip Swartz with the Air Force Times. Sir, you talked about needing some sort of rules or standards for operations in space, international rules and standards. It's something that General Hyden mentioned at AFA Orlando. Just hoping you can unpack that a little bit. What are some specifics that you think need to be in the first draft of an international agreement that every country should sign on to?
Sure. So since I'm not working for the State Department, I will start by answering what I think industry should do to develop de facto norms amongst themselves first. And I think as industry proliferates these smaller and smaller satellites that operate in larger and larger flocks, that there's a need to aid our capabilities to do space situational awareness, if only for monitoring safety. And so I'm looking for industry to come up with standards regarding, if I'm going to emit as my way of letting people know where I am, then let's come together on a standard on that. If I don't emit, then there has to be some physical way to help people to see you, especially as you get smaller and smaller. And so there's a number of ways you could do that. You know, radar reflectors on the corners of the CubeSat is one way to do it, to make yourself a little brighter, make the job easier for a radar system to find you. Okay, so that we can help make sure that safety is maintained. So I'll start there, and I'll say that's work that is best done by industry to develop those de facto norms without the government getting involved just yet. Secondly, on the international arena, as you know, there's been a couple of efforts sponsored by the EU, for example, to come up with an international standard for behavior in space. Didn't quite achieve its goals last year, and so now we're pursuing some multilateral and bilateral efforts right now. And we're starting in an area that I think folks can generally agree on, and that is not creating long-lived debris in space. And so if we start there, and we all agree that none of us want to pollute the space environment, especially in the orbits that are most important to all of us, then we can build from that on other activities about how we're going to maintain respectful distances and operate in a safe way, in the same way that we do when we do, intercepts of airplanes at borders, for example. The same types of logic applies when it comes to maintaining and operating in a professional manner in space. Okay? Thanks, Phil.
This lady right here, Bridget.
Hi, Andrea, how are you?
Andrea Shalal with Reuters. So I wanted to ask you two questions that are sort of related. Yesterday, Brett Toby resigned from United Launch Alliance after making some very candid remarks during a university talk in which he said that ULA did not bid for the GPS-3 contract, not because of the accounting systems or anything, but because it was trying to shy away from a price shootout or at SpaceX. And I know that Senator McCain had asked you to look into that, whether there was any way to penalize ULA for not having bid. Now that ULA sort of acknowledged inadvertently, I mean, he's resigned, he's been fired, I think. But I'm wondering if you can say anything more about that specific issue, but then more broadly on the whole issue of ULA and SpaceX, how you see this developing. There's been so much discussion about ULA not really having a sufficient business base to survive, and how you see that unfolding.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Andrea. So I did not hear the report about that speech or what that was, but I'll take what you said at face value. In terms of the question from Senator McCain about how you could punish a company for not bidding, what we took great pains to explain to the senator was that companies are free to choose whether to bid on contracted efforts with the government. There's not a requirement to bid, and nor is there a penalty for not bidding. It's a business decision that each company makes. The concern, of course, is with the fact that ULA has a different contract with the Air Force for the maintenance of the infrastructure for launch. And it's important for everyone to realize that that contract that is called ELC is the contract that funds the infrastructure and support for the launches that are already performing under the block buy, under the EELB block buy. And so think of them as two companion task orders under the same contract. One is contracted for a block buy set of launches under ELV, which, as we all know, reduced the costs of launch considerably from what we would have paid without the ELV contract. And one plan on that contract is, hey, we have to then fund the infrastructure associated with that, as instead of paying for it, by the drink embedded within each launch price. And so that infrastructure cost maps directly to the launches under EELV. They're totally separate from competitive launches, which would come with their own infrastructure costs. And in fact, that infrastructure cost, when we award launches to SpaceX, that infrastructure cost is just embedded within each launch. Now, as we move into a competitive environment, it doesn't make sense to do ELC the way we have been doing it, and we're phasing it out with the ELV contract. And so we will see more and more, as we do more competitive launches, that the ELC contract will be, we have an accounting method now to assign that infrastructure cost to the launches that are already under contract, so that there's no unfair advantage there. Okay. And that methodology has been approved, but it was approved after the GPS RFP went out. And so I think that was why they originally had said, hey, we don't have surety that our accounting for infrastructure costs will be aligned with our bid. Now that's taken away, that's clear. We now have that straightened out. And so we anticipate now that the potential is there for a straight up competition on apples to apples basis on cost. To your larger question about competitiveness long term, as you're aware, ULA has proposed a plan that allows them to develop a new generation of launch systems. Remember the age associated with both Delta and Atlas. That would modernize its capabilities on both the rocket engine side and on the rocket itself, and enable it to replace both the Delta and the Atlas in performance space. In other words, it would have a medium and a heavy variant that would allow it to take the full range of national security payloads to the full range of orbits. And that will take several years to develop and get certified. And so we're really just talking about what are we going to do in the gap time between having another full-up system, that paired with SpaceX, and potentially other entrants as well, many of whom are working to improve their capabilities through awards of our OTA contracts. And so that's the strategy going forward, and we're well on our way. If we can proceed down that road, we will have multiple certified launch systems in several years.
This gentleman right there.
Sir, James Drew from Flight Global. Can I ask you how you see the commercial space industry that is emerging fitting into the Air Force mission? Do you see any potential future for reusable space vehicles or for hire services from some people like Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, everything like that? Do you see that benefiting the DoD mission in any way?
Sure. So thanks for the question. On the launch side, we are by law required to use commercial launch services, and so we do not buy rockets. We don't buy engines. We don't buy components. We contract for launch services, and so we work with launch system providers to be able to perform those services. And while we have operated with ULA for many years for our medium and heavy launch services, worked with a variety of providers for smaller launch capability. And so as more of these commercial entrants come in to the market, as their operating costs are sustained by commercial business, prices become much more competitive across the board, and we have a wider variety of launch providers to choose from, should they get certified and choose to compete for national security launches. And so I'm very excited at the work that's being done. On the reusable side, you see a lot of progress with both Blue Origin and SpaceX on being able to recover main engine components and reuse them. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. There's also commercial efforts in the area of fully recoverable systems that land like a plane. And I think that's, some of the work that folks like Vert Britannia are doing and Virgin Galactic are very promising, and we're looking forward to those systems as they continue to develop.
Just building on that, so we saw how long it took SpaceX to go through that certification program to compete in the national security space launch business. And similar to DoD's outreach to Silicon Valley, one of the main points is how you make.
Would you mind? Yeah, could you give me
Oh, sorry. Yeah, how do you make the certification process attractive to these young startups who don't necessarily want to jump through all the regulatory hurdles that the DoD might put up for them? How do you make that more attractive for them to come into your orbit?
So first of all, if you didn't hear the question was how do you make the DoD regulatory process more attractive for more new entrants? Our number one priority is assured access to space. And that means having highly reliable systems that are capable of launching what turn out to be very expensive systems in a mission assured way. And so I guess I'm less concerned about bending the regulatory rules for new entrants than I am to help those new entrants get their systems to the point where they can launch reliably and with a record of successful launches. That is our priority. And so traditionally the DoD has been willing to wait a little bit longer and spend a little bit more to get highly assured systems. Now, that being said, there are a number of small launch capabilities that are under exploration for experimental purposes and for the commercial variants of some of these small sats that we've been talking about, where the level of risk tolerance is higher. And so we believe that as that continues to mature, there will be opportunities to do the same thing for the DoD market. We're not there today, but we are in the process of experimenting with some of those technologies and working with some of those vendors in order to, A, help to improve their reliability, and B, to look at potentials for much smaller systems that we would have a different risk profile for.
And the lady in the back with the patterned dress, Bridget, against the window.
Good morning, sir. This is Anita Torwaya for James Defense. Could you speak a little bit more about specific technology that the U.S. should be investing in or focusing on in order to ensure continued space dominance?
Talk some more about, sure, additional technologies that we should be investing in to ensure space dominance. To the extent I can, I shall. But I will start by saying that much of the investment that I already see going on in commercial space is exactly what we already need. So I started talking a bit about commercial satellite communications. Those companies are investing today in developing digital payloads that have the ability to do a couple things that are beneficial to the DoD. First, to have many more spot beams instead of large continent-sized beams, right? So that they can more clearly focus on individual customers. For us, that capability is great because it also limits our vulnerability to jamming, right? Digital beamforming capability, same thing. If I were to look at specific technologies that need additional development, I would look at, given some of the developments out there in the communications environment, you may want to look at the ability to do more encryption on your systems. You may want to look at ground stations and the need for additional cyber hardening. If I think about where we are vulnerable, what keeps me up at night is the ground. I have every confidence in this industry to build the best possible technology for the space capability. The question is, can we assure it? Can we protect it? Can we make sure that the data stays secure? And that starts on the ground. So I would look for industry to put as much investment on the ground stations and the control points and the receive stations and transmit stations as they do in the space technology to ensure the cyber hardness.
We have time for one more question. The gentleman with the green tie and the handsome beard.
That narrows it down.
That's a great green tie, by the way, I just want to say.
Thank you.
For St. Patrick's Day.
I'm Frank Moore with Aviation Week. And I'm interested, there's been a lot of reporting about the engine end of the launch vehicles. I'm interested in the other end. You have some payloads, I understand, that are dedicated to the Atlas, are designed, built for the Atlas V. So near term, is there anything underway to at least prepare to move those off if that becomes necessary, given the situation on Capitol Hill and elsewhere? And then longer term, as you move into more launch availability, I guess, is that changing the way that you're procuring your payloads? Is there any change in the process for designing satellites without pretty much a clear idea of where they're gonna, which rocket is going to launch them?
Okay. So to your first question, for the past several years, the requirement has been in place for dual compatibility. In other words, for national security payloads to be designed to launch on either Atlas or Delta. Many of the same constraints that would make it possible for you to integrate them onto one of those satellites, rockets, also apply to Falcon now going forward. And so there are only a small number of systems which would require additional integration work in order to switch from one launch vehicle to another. That's the good news. Going forward, we have sort of two tracks on this. How do I plan my payloads of the future to eliminate restrictions on what launch platforms can launch them? The first is maintaining the dual compatibility requirements for existing systems that we're going to create more copies of, and making that more broad across new entrants as well that are certified. So that would include what we're doing for Falcon as well as what we're doing for the potential new system that ULA is designing now. But in addition to that, more structurally, more architecturally, we're looking at how do I maximize my launch capability and make best use of the capacity that we have across the launch industry. And so for that, we're looking at a couple of different avenues. First, you've heard us talk about small sats and the proliferation of smaller systems. That is something that the government is looking at as well. And so there's a number of efforts that happen to have a virtuous harmony with our approaches to improving resilience, like disaggregating payloads, like the proliferating, which helps if you have, you could launch multiple satellites on the same launcher, for example. In addition, we are looking at new ways to actually configure the launches themselves. And so when you have both large payloads and small payloads in your manifest, there are times when you have lots of additional swap on your heavier launchers, and your medium and heavy, and you could launch, for example, small vehicles along with your large vehicle on an S program, for example. And as you may be aware, there are broad area announcements out that say, hey, if you've got an experimental system, something you want to try that you need launch for, rideshare. We have a rideshare program that allows us to do that. And we're looking for industry, when it does launches, to do the same thing, to create opportunities for either research institutions or educational institutions to get access to space more easily. And so I would recommend you pursue that as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Mr. Beauchamp. Mr. Beauchamp, if you join me up here for a moment, please. Unbeknownst to you, during your presentation, we have a silent poll taken of our attendees as to the engagement level and how informative your talk is. And we present a challenge coin based on that. And some have been as small as a little lapel pin. I think the largest on record was about the size of a quarter. In your case, though, sir, because of your wonderful presentation, I'm giving you the jump.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
You could probably see that in the back. I'm gonna peel the foil off.
Well, and here's a trivet so that you can display.
I think I need this, yeah.
Thank you, sir. We thank you all for joining us and invite you to our April presentation. Our speaker will be Lieutenant General Mike Holmes, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Plans and Requirements, and it'll be held right here at the Sheraton Pentagon City on April 7th. And as an administrative note, we've been assured that the barrier on the parking garage will be in the up position as you attempt to exit. Jennifer, don't go charging it at full speed on your way out. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.